Hello chess friends and welcome to your of Chess channel and welcome back to the Chessable Masters in 2021. We're now in the second day of the preliminaries, and of course after 2 days Vasily So is still in the lead. In my opinion, Vasily So is really the top favorite to win this super event because Vasily is playing really incredible. Whenever Vasily has some kind of advantage, then he's breaking his opponents. When he has maybe a slightly worse game, then he at least makes it draw. So it's so far a great performance by Vasily So. But today we're following a great game between Humpy Koneru against Alireza Firouzja. Humpy Koneru, of course, the legend of the sport because she became in 2002 the world's youngest female grandmaster in chess history. She broke Judith Polgar's record for 3 months. I think it was really a historical moment when that happened because Judith Polgar was already a legend. Then, of course, with that accomplishment, Humpy Koneru also became really the legend of our chess world. So this game is really incredible because it's such a beautiful tactical game. You know, when Alireza Firouzja is playing the game with white or with black pieces, he's always trying to do some tactics. He's always trying to do sort of a dynamic game. So that's why, in my opinion, this was simply the best game of the day too. So let's check out now the game. Here, Humpy Koneru opened with the move d4. We have knight to f6 by Alireza, c4, and now g6. You see, here Alireza is already announcing that he wants to play the King's Indian, and the King's Indian is, I think, sort of an opening that's not popular so much in top grandmaster world because it's not played maybe by Magnus Carlsen so often, or maybe by, I don't know, Fabiano Caruana, Vidingler, by this really top elite grandmasters when they're playing maybe classical time format chess. But you see, once in time we can see really some sharp King's Indian games, especially when Alireza is playing, because still he wants, of course, sometimes to surprise his opponent with some tactical elements of the game. So after move g6, we have now g3. We have now this fianchetto variation by Humpy Koneru, and we have now bishop to g7, bishop to g2, castling, and now knight to c3. Here Alireza plays now a provocative move. He's trying now to force Humpy here to play the move d5, because if that happens, then of course knight to a5 could be a great opportunity. Then with c5 we could lock also further the pawn structure on the queen side, but the c4 is then a long-term weakness, and the problem is now if you protect in one particular moment your pawn with the move b3, then of course you risk some tactics with knight to e4 and liberating this long diagonal for the dark square bishop. I've played several times this variation from black's perspective. I have, I think, sort of a decent success with these lines, although I've lost many games also. But you want basically your opponent to play the move d5, because the move d5 is sort of a clarification. Then the pawn structure in the center is not so mobile anymore, so that's why here in the continuation Humpy played the a more flexible move here, the move knight to f3. We have now d5 by Alireza Firouzja, and that's of course a huge difference how Alireza is playing the game, because he's much stronger than me. When I play this opening, I most of the times play the move here d6, then I try some ideas like bishop to f5, knight to e4, cement the position around the square e4. But here Alireza wants, of course, to have immediately some kind of a clarification in the center. He breaks now the position with the move d5. We have c takes d5, knight to d5 here by Alireza, and Humpy plays now castling. Although of course e4 is also an opportunity, but then we have some kind of a Grunfeld structure. I think it's not a Grunfeld but similar, because after knight takes c3, here of course b takes c3 will be the continuation of white. But I think with the move e5 again, black can really simplify the game, because even if white makes now the move d5, then again the pawn structure is clarified in the center, although white has now a space advantage. But I think with knight to a5 again and occupying maybe the c4 square, or maybe even knight to e7 with the move f5 to break really the structure here, because we have here a small pawn chain, and of course the pawn chain is best to be broken around the square e4. So that's why it's not good here to play the position like this, although you have some kind of a tempo against the knight. But here still the knight has great flexibilities here with knight to a5, as we said, and then followed with knight to c4. So that's why here casting, we have now knight to b6 by Alireza. He's now waiting Humpy to do something, and he's now also attacking here the pawn on d4 3 times. We have now bishop to f4, which was now a tricky move, because what Alireza could have played here is of course now the move knight takes d4. Then of course knight takes d4. We can maybe play here e5 from black's perspective to play sort of a fork. The knight to c6 is really a tricky continuation, because you have to now of course take. If you play of course b takes c6, then it's not so good. Then of course we can simply play bishop to e3, and I think white is much better because of this bishop's activity. You see now we don't even have to immediately take out the pawn on c6. We can play a calm game. We can now wait a little bit because the bishops are aiming, of course, towards these weaknesses. We have now c7 weakness, c6 weakness, but also here the a7 weakness. So what white should probably do after potential e5, as we said, is simply to play knight to c6. The best continuation here for Alireza would have been the move queen to d1. This wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to point out how dynamic this position can really be, and this actually the suggested move also by the engine. It's really a pervert engine line. After knight to e7 here, king to h8, and now rook to d1, we have e takes f4, but now knight to c8, we have rook to c8, bishop to b7. Everything is pretty much forced here. Really wild stuff. So after move rook to b8, here bishop to a6. Now after f takes g3, h takes g3, I think with this move bishop to c3, black can really simplify the game. After b takes c3, we have now reached, I think, an equal endgame, in which I think the most often outcome would be probably a draw in top grandmaster level. So here Alireza didn't play this move knight takes d4. He didn't want to go into this simplified line. I'm really sure that Alireza knows this theory for sure, because he wanted, I think, to play a different line. He played now maybe a worse move, but it's a more dynamic move. He's waiting again. Maybe if white plays again the move d5, then of course we have again opportunities to play here also knight to b4, counter-attacking here the pawn on d5. The pawn would be then 3 times attacked, with also the bishop's activity against the knight, which is also the defender of the d5 pawn. Again, I think it would be a pleasant game here for black. So that's why here queen to c1, played by Humpy Koneru. Again, if you try here something like knight takes d4, again it's not such a good continuation. It seems so that you gain the pawn, but again white has some great counter-attack possibilities with the move knight takes d4, queen to d4, but now knight to b5 is actually the main issue here, because then the queen can maybe take, queen takes b2, bishop to b2, rook to b1, attacking the bishop. Now knight to a4 is really the suggested move also by the engine here. So you see black can defend the bishop for a while, but now after knight to c7, you see now, and the rook to a7, here bishop to e3, the bishop can be very nasty here. You have to play something like b6, but again knight to b5, and I think white's pieces are much better. White's pieces are controlling more files, more diagonals. The knight is very active, the bishops are very active. You see black has some problems to develop the minor pieces. Rook to d1, that would follow, and I think in the next couple of moves white will find really the best squares on the board. So that's why here it's not again the best continuation here for Alireza. So as I said, it's really a sharp opening line. After move knight to d4, we saw now the continuation here. Alireza tried again to spice things up on the queen side. He played now the move a4. He's trying again to play the move a3, because after move a3 and b3, or b takes a3, then again this long diagonal for the dark square bishop is working. Then again this bishop gets more and more powerful. What Humpy should have probably played here is maybe even to play something like bishop to h6, trying to trade off the dark square bishops, or maybe rook to d1. Here in the continuation we have now this idea rook to d1, trying finally to play the move d5 and also protecting this pawn. But now Alireza plays really a wild move rook to a5, because he probably sensed that white could maybe play here the move bishop to h6, then maybe bishop to h6 or e5 are possibilities. Maybe let's see this continuation, bishop to h6, queen to h6, and then the rook comes very active into the game. Although again the engine gives a slightly advantage here for white, but I really like this move rook to h5, because then in the continuation some ideas could work of bishop to h3, rook takes h3, then maybe sneaking in with the queen here on h3. So it would be, I think, also very interesting continuation, especially in this rapid chess. So you see Alireza found really great opportunities to activate this rook from a8 somehow to the edge of the board. So really wild ideas here by the young prodigy. But here after move rook to a5, Humpy played now a passive move a3, and it's really not the best of moves. Bishop to h6 is really the suggested move. Now Alireza plays bishop to e6. He realized now that he should probably try this blockade idea around the square d5, and now the fun really starts, because here Humpy plays now a risky move d5, and it seems so that it's actually a great idea, because after knight to d5 we have now here this move knight to g5 by Humpy. She's attacking, of course, the bishop on e6. Then, of course, if we take out this bishop, then, of course, the pawn structure is doubled. Then the pawn structure is really messed up. And then with the bishop pair on the board, of course, white would be much better. So, but now Alireza finds really the best continuation. He found really a beautiful tactic. Maybe you can pause the video and try to see now the best continuation here for white. It was really a wild move that Alireza saw. Okay, take your time. It's maybe not so easy to see. It's really a wild game with dynamics all over the board. Really, the pieces are dancing all over the board. Really wild stuff what happened so far in the game. So after move knight to g5, here Alireza found a great move, knight takes c3, because if you play now rook to d8, then you get this one, knight to e2, again the fork. You have to play king to f1. Now we can take out the queen. Here rook to knight takes c1, but now of course first rook takes f8. It comes with a check, king to f8. We have now knight to e6, f takes e6, and now after bishop to c1, if you don't want to lose, of course, your b2 pawn, you have to play bishop takes c1. Then rook to b5 is a great move. Now again we're threatening to simply take out this pawn, and even if black takes now, pardon me, white takes now the knight on c6, b takes c6 can happen. And although you see these are really weak pawns, they're not so good. We have two double pawns here on the c file and also two double pawns on the e file, but the problem is now the activity of white pieces. You have to now protect your pawn on b2, and now with the move rook to b3, the whole queen side gets paralyzed. The bishop cannot move, the rook cannot move anymore. So as I said, this would be a much better continuation, because the king, the black's king, can play now much freely and will probably march towards the center. It will be now a very nice path for the king. And although here maybe white can stuck a little bit to this position, in the continuation black could also try ideas like c5, c6, and c5, c4, and then here also the move c3, because black could also use here the b file attack in order to keep the pressure around the square b2. So really brilliant tactics. So after move knight takes c3, here Humpy Koneru took b takes c3, but now queen to c8. Here we have a bishop takes c6, b takes c6, and now after knight takes e6, queen to e6. Very nice move here by Alireza. He played queen to c8. Now this pawn structure on the e file doesn't get messed up. Here in the continuation we have now queen to e3 by Humpy. She's trying to simplify the game by trading off the queens, but the problem is now this one. After queen to e3, bishop to e3, now comes bishop to c3, and suddenly black is much better. Black has now a decisive pawn here on the queen side, the decisive pawn on the c file. Not that it's only one pawn, it's now these are now two pawns. And the problem is now again white's activity is not so good, because here we can notice also the pawn on a3 is on a dark square. That's, I think, a huge problem, because this pawn can be of course attacked by the dark square bishop. If this pawn would be on the light square, then of course it would be a different position. Now with this blockade on a4, this pawn cannot move, and it's also becoming now a long-term problem here for Humpy Koneru. So rook to a2, we have bishop to e5, rook to c1, attacking also now the weaknesses on the c file. Here in the continuation we have rook to a6, so at least for a while here Alireza is protecting his c6 pawn. We have rook from a to c2, rook to b8, we have now bishop to c5, and now bishop to d6, because what of course Alireza is hoping for is this continuation after something like, I don't know, bishop takes bishop takes d6, then of course c takes d6, and okay, maybe white can grab this pawn, but the problem is now this one will be also lost. We can take, and now in the continuation we can try, of course, rook to b3, and it's now a completely winning endgame, because you can maybe try to attack this one, but we can protect it. You can again maybe try check, we can play king to g7, you can again try, but now with king to f6 no more checks are possible. So in the next move black will simply take out the pawn and has now of course a completely winning endgame. So that's why after move bishop to d6, here king to g2 was played by Humpy. Here rook to b3, again this idea to simply continue the pressure around the square a3. Here e4, we have f6 preventing some f4 e5 ideas here by Humpy Koneru. We have now h4, king to f7, we have now f4, bishop takes c5, rook takes c5, rook takes a3, rook takes c6, rook to b6, 6. We have rook to c7, but now very nice move here by Alireza Firouzja. He gets now his rooks on the 3rd rank, and they are attacking now the g3 pawn. This pawn cannot be protected anymore. In the continuation, we have rook to a7. Alireza simply takes, rook takes g3, king to h2, and now after rook to e3, in this position, Humpy Koneru resigned. So what's the issue? Of course, this pawn cannot be protected anymore. Even if you try somehow maybe to get some kind of counter attack with rook to c4, then you get even checkmated because you have to play king to g1, and then with rook to a1 you get checkmated. So as I said, after move rook to e3, in this position, Humpy Koneru resigned. So really brilliant game, really wild stuff, really wild tactics in this King's Indian, really an open game. I think Alireza loves this kind of positions. He loves the position to explode in the center of the board where the pieces are dancing. It's simply a position that simply fits for him. He, as I said, is really a dynamic player. Sometimes it works for him, sometimes it's not working for him, but at least he's trying to make the game more and more attractive, and I really enjoyed this game. In my opinion, this was the game of the day too. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. If you want to see also the other game that we have covered so far from this tournament, check out the recent analysis of the game between Wesley So and Levan Ronan. Here's the link of our previous analyzed game from this tournament. And if you want to see some more sharp attacking games, check out my best chess games of all time series with some great games from the past played by Garry Kasparov, Mikhail Tal, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.